Actually, did anybody hear that?
Cannot hear you.
Oh, that'll do it.
Oh, no.
Testing.
Sorry, try that again.
Hello, Metrotarians.
Yay.
Thank goodness. I thought I was dealing with the toughest Rotary crowd I'd ever seen there for a minute. All right. Well, hello. Very cool to have some time with you guys again. And especially for a topic like this. Normally I talk about, what it's like to be in an online and asynchronous club, or about kind of innovative approaches to education, which I can geek out about all night, or things like that. However, my topic today is a little different. It is valuing the listener while speaking Japanese. And so I'm hoping that this is something that you guys will find intriguing, and I'll kind of dive in as we go. I always try to remind myself that there is a captions option in Google Slides. And so for those of you who are like, hey, captions, that's awesome, we're already ahead of the game, and I only just started the presentation. So all good there. Additionally, for librarians in the group, every image you see in my slides is one that I have the legal right to use for free, and I always cite my sources. Can I get a woohoo for citing sources? Excellent. All right, good. All right, so a little bit about me. I am a former high school teacher of Japanese. I'm a former principal, and I run a little nonprofit called Next Vista. And you know a little bit about that. I mean, that's fine. I'm happy to talk about it more if you're interested. Just in case you're looking for some celebrity in your speakers, let me tell you that if you looked at the list of people who are native Texans who teach Japanese or who have taught Japanese, and then you rank them by their ability to juggle, I might just be at the top of the list. So all right. So with that, let's talk a little bit about Japanese. Running a Japanese language program at a high school was actually a ton of fun, in part because American teens have a lot to learn from the Japanese language. Let me just start with kind of that thought. So it requires in Japanese to think about the position of the listener, to really understand how you choose your verbs, your words, everything, kind of based on a number of things that you have to be kind of a little more aware of your surroundings, let's just say. And I was excited to become a teacher, a high school teacher of Japanese language. At first, I thought these were all going to be students who were like ready to start the next trans-Pacific trading business and go to MIT or wherever they're going to go. No, they were all there because they like animated movies. That's why they walked in my classroom. And so be it. In essence, that's okay, because for them, it was their reason to be there. And that's a good thing. It is a good thing for kids to have the chance to kind of choose what they want to learn in some interesting way. So we did a number of things in the program that I thought were kind of cool. We had sushi day, right, where we'd have the kids kind of get in line, and they could come and get a couple of California rolls and then get back in line and do that kind of stuff. We had a t-shirt for the program, because why shouldn't you have a t-shirt for your language program? And of course, we had the Japanese language cheering section for the homecoming game. Now this was very important. And I found that some of my students who were least likely to say, do the homework, became quite excited about the opportunities offered by the Japanese language cheering section for the homecoming game. So, for example, one of the kids would wave this banner. This was just a banner that they thought was really important, and so we'd wave that. And people in the audience would say, "Oh, wow, that's really cool. That's so awesome that you have these things. What does that say, by the way?" Well, that says "yomenai desho," which means you probably cannot read this. Which boom, the kid has an inside joke, and all good. So a lot of fun being a part of a program like that, and trying to help kids begin to see communication from a very different lens. And so, by the way, the SCTHGALP is the Silver Creek Thunderously Hip Japanese Language Program. I named it. Thank you very much. All right. So with that, let's kind of talk about what it means to look at a language like this. When I first got off the plane, this was the fall of '87. when I first got off the plane to spend a semester studying at a university between Osaka and Kyoto, I remember stepping out of the airport and looking up at a billboard and thinking to myself, wow, I'm totally illiterate. And let me say, that is a powerful thing to experience, right? I mean, there's a certain amount of like thinking about the situation of any number of people when you realize you cannot read, you can't even guess. And so that was kind of my first, and I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, okay, well, if I go to a grocery store and I want lemon juice and I end up with bleach, that could be a problem, right? I figure, this is stuff we got to figure out. But in looking at this, one of the things that people talk about when they think of the Japanese language is people on our side of the Pacific, is they think, oh, that must be so difficult. And one of the important frames for the talk tonight is that there is a big difference between difficult and different. These are not the same at all. And while Japanese has a few things that can be considered conceptually difficult, I would say that structurally it's quite an easy language, and I'll make that case to you as a part of telling you about how this language works. So I should note that there are three writing systems, and difficult is not the issue. Time consuming, different story. So, for example, I pulled this from a website just a couple of days ago, right? And what it is, this is Prime Minister Kishida talking to a group of representatives at a conference going on in Africa. Africaへの支援何が必要, right? ガナ在住28歳日本人経営者に聞く, which is, okay, for supporting Africa, what's important? What's required? And we'll ask a manager, a Japanese manager who's 28 years old and living in Ghana. That's what that is. But what I want to point out with this is this, and maybe I can actually get even kind of a cool thing. I'm going to turn on the laser pointer. Kind of fun. All right, there we go, laser pointer. Woo! All right, so these letters right here, these letters, they're actually syllables, not letters, but I'll call them letters for the moment. And these are from one kind of Japanese writing called katakana. And these are normally the syllables you use when you're writing a word that's taken from another language. And there are actually a fair number of words from other languages. So, for example, there is a Japanese word that is spaghetti. I'm sure you can guess what that means, right? And you get better and better at this kind of thing, even as the words get a little bit more different. Then there are simpler things, kind of like this one and these two right here. And these are also syllables, but they're used as a part of how Japanese writes its own language. Why would they have a different syllabary for non-Japanese words and Japanese words? Couldn't tell you, but they do. And then there are these kind of more complex ones here. These are the characters. And the characters were taken from Chinese years and years and years ago when Buddhist monks brought them from their the monasteries where they learned to read and got the sutras and all of this kind of stuff back in the 600s and stuff like that. So Japanese is a mix of all of these things. Is it difficult? It looks difficult, but it's not. It's just time consuming, right? This is all stuff you can kind of figure out as you go. If at some point, if you have a question about it, I can talk a little bit more about Japanese writing, but essentially it's time consuming. That does not equate to structurally difficult. So let's talk a little bit about the grammar in getting to that as well. So when we talk about that, I want to start by talking about verbs. Verbs come at the end of the sentence. So if you want to say, I'm going to Tokyo, you would say Tokyo to go. That's essentially the structure that you'd use. That's different, not difficult, but different. All right. And getting used to that is a thing. But there are simplifications in that as well. So for example, there's no person to the verb. You don't conjugate according to the person, right? So you wouldn't say, I jump, he jumps, or como comes come, right? Or something like that. No person to the verb in Japanese. There's eat and there's ate. There you go, right? And so in terms of structure, there's some simplicity to Japanese verbs. We have prepositions. Prepositions are positioned pre the word that they describe. To Tokyo. To comes before Tokyo. In Japanese, they have postpositions. So you would say Tokyo e or Tokyo ni, right? Which would tell you the same kind of thing, but it happens on the other side of the word. So it's a difference. Again, not something that's necessarily complex, but it is different. Tenses are interesting, in part because, like I mentioned earlier, you've got eat, you've got ate. There is no future tense. And you might say, wait a minute. What do you mean there's no future tense? Don't need one. You just don't need one in a language. No, that's crazy. You got to be able to talk about where you're going to go. No, you don't. If I tell you next week I go to Tokyo, you know exactly what I mean. Right? So effectively, there are constructions in language that are sometimes that seem perfectly natural to us, not even necessary to be able to communicate effectively. So no future tense. There you go. And one more that we'll add here is that they do have pronouns, hardly ever use them. And in part because structural simplicity means that it's not particularly necessary. If I say, for example, Heather is going to Mexico. She speaks Spanish. In the first sentence, I establish Heather as the topic. In the second sentence, I go to the trouble of saying she. I don't need her name because I've already established her as the topic. In Japanese, translated literally and spatially, I would say Heather, Tokyo to go, or sorry, Mexico to go. And in the next sentence, I would say Spanish can speak. I don't need to reference her at all because I haven't changed the topic. Unless I change the topic, everybody assumes I'm going to keep using her as the topic because I brought her up before. Make sense? So there are these kind of interesting things about the language that are there. But there are some pieces to this that do take us kind of beyond the realm of what we're used to. Because it's one thing to like eliminate the future tense, right? Or just realize that you don't always need the preposition, or not the preposition, the pronoun. Thank you very much. There are some more things though, and I'll start by talking about vanity. See what I did there? Anyway, so the idea with vanity works this way, right? If you are talking about yourself, you would not talk about yourself in the same way you might talk about somebody else. And you're like, well, okay, well, that makes sense. Well, you've probably all heard like the term san, right? So Shags is my buddy in the E Club, and in Japanese, I might refer to him as Shags-san, right? The Honorable Shags, right? So good dude. Unless like the TV news is talking about a criminal, there's typically something added to it. That's when you don't hear anything added to someone's name, by the way. When the TV news is talking about a criminal, they just use the name. All right. So at any rate, so if I refer to myself as Rushton-san, oh no, what? Clearly a noob speaking the language at that point, or somebody who thinks very, very highly of himself. All right. Don't worry, because of my face, they would assume I'm simply a noob. All right. But that's a part of it. Now let's kind of take that a step further, right? What if we're talking about a teacher? Well, a teacher, if you refer, let's just say that the lady in the picture she's a teacher, and let's just say that her name is Smith. All right. And she's a teacher, it would be a little weird to call her Smith-san. And you're like, wait a minute, but you're honoring the person with san. But she's a teacher. She's Smith Sensei. You with me? Right. And so the idea now is that we're recognizing this position that the other person holds in society in a way that's very important. Now, the word itself, sensei, is a word that carries a lot of weight, right? So, for example, if I am telling somebody in Japanese that I am a teacher, I wouldn't use the word sensei because that carries too much honor, and I wouldn't do that to myself because. All right. Instead, I would refer to myself as an educator, kyoju, or I would say I teach or something like that. All right. So there would be like a different way about it when thinking about how you get these things across to the other person. All right. Now, I want to extend the idea of your kind of sense of the language to some extremes on this, right? Why? What do you mean? This whole thing of talking about the other person and choosing your suffixes or your words based on the other person extends in some interesting directions. So, for example, the verb for to give, ageru, right? Ageru is actually drawn from the same idea as to raise, which makes sense, right? If you are giving somebody, maybe you are holding it up to a person. So are you, like, if I am giving, is Steve, are you the president currently?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
By the way, right? So it would be a foul in Japanese for him to say, like, I am President Steve. That would be a little much. All right. But if I'm giving something to Steve, I'm giving it up to him. I'm honoring him, right? There is a completely different verb for give if I said Steve gave me something. So I can't say he gave me because that goes up and I'm saying like he gave up to me. Can't do that. Right? That doesn't work. Right. So you have to kind of look at some of your words in Japanese from that perspective of who's the other person? How am I describing the relationship in the words I choose? Things like that. Now there's an interesting extra element to this, which is that, and matter of fact, two interesting elements to this, is that one, with the verbs of giving, there is a different word for giving when it's somebody kind of straight across, and I mean that in terms of hierarchy, as opposed to giving when it's someone up. So I wouldn't actually say ageru when I'm talking about giving to the sensei. I would say sashi ageru. It's a different word because I'm showing that I understand the position of the sensei. It works the other way as well. There's kureru, someone gives me, and then there's sensei ga kudasaru. So the teacher gives me, I would recognize that it's coming down to me from the teacher. There's also like yaru, which is to give, which is what you'd say when you're talking about like giving food to the dog or just giving something to a child. Not that we equate dogs to children. It's just that, just structurally there is that hierarchy. Just saying. An extra interesting thing about the verbs of giving is that they work with other verbs. What do you mean? So, for example, let's say that I am talking about doing the laundry. All right, sentaku wo suru. I can use a verb for giving to describe giving of the action. So if my friend Mark does the laundry for me, I can say he gives me the doing of the laundry. If I offer to give him the doing of the laundry, hey, do you want me to do the laundry for you? Right? I can say, sentaku wo shite agemashou ka? Shall I give you the doing of the laundry? So because the verbs for giving are verbs that are important with regard to the position of the other person, and when you are using this grammatical construction, you have to use that as well. So there's a lot going on in the language that essentially has you making commentary about what's going on in the world around you as you choose your words. Is that difficult? That's actually bordering on difficult. But like anything else, if you practice it enough, you get used to it. All right. Let's add this about Japanese. It is a foul in Japanese to ask a question that forces the other person to just look at you and say, no. Right? That's a foul.
Wow.
Are there situations where this is a perfectly natural thing? Of course, right? But in the United States, we kind of have this kind of like, this is what I think we should do, right? And if it's not what the other person thinks, that person's now in a pickle from a Japanese perspective, because this person has just gone to the trouble of saying we're going to do this, and now you have to tell that person no. That person actually went, in doing this, set you up to have to say no to them. That's a foul. So when you look at how decisions happen in Japanese, you deal with a lot of interesting elements to it, right? So, for example, for the average American, the amount of time it takes to make a decision in a group in Japan is maddening, all right? I mean, you're just sort of like, oh, would somebody make a decision here? We're just trying to choose a restaurant. Come on, right? So from my perspective, I'm like, I'm hungry. Somebody just name the place. But from the Japanese perspective, the choosing of the restaurant, even when hungry, is not nearly as important as establishing that the group has a cohesion, that the people in the group are willing to look out for each other, that they consider the concerns and needs of the other, right? So if I say like, hey, what about pizza? As opposed to like, I think we should go for pizza, like now we've set up a conflict. What about pizza? And if a couple of people go, that's a no, actually, all right? But they didn't have to say it. So when you're communicating in Japanese, you are always on the hook, if you're doing it right, to look out for the concerns and the position of the other. Now, I'll add this about the way language works. A little story. When I was in that first semester in Japan, I actually roomed with a Japanese guy in a dormitory. Right. So this Japanese guy, Toshio, wonderful guy, big guy, as a matter of fact. In high school, he had done sumo. Now, you might be like, oh my God, he was huge. No, I'm not talking about like the sumo wrestlers who, are mountainous. I'm just, he was just a big guy. And he and I got to be buddies, right? Now, an interesting thing about Toshio is that he was a Mormon, right? Now I'm not Mormon, but he is. And one point during the semester, we were in the room and studying, and he just stopped at one point and said, "I think I'm crazy." I said, "Well, wait, what?" He said, "Do you think I'm crazy?" I said, "No. Why do you ask?" And he said, "Well, last year there was a person here from the United States, and when he found out I'm a Mormon, he said that I'm crazy." I said, "Oh, no, I don't think you're crazy." All right. It's like, oh, okay. Now, we had another couple of moments like that, kind of just little things where he'd ask a question, we'd talk about it a bit, whatever. The end of the semester arrives, and it's time for me to go back to the United States. So I have to like lug my stuff over to the airport and go back to the United States. I'll help you. I will help you get to the airport. I was like, oh man, that'd be great. Thanks. So, carrying bags, at the time too, it was like, like a train to here, a train to there, and then like a bus to this point. And just by the time you get to the airport, you're just exhausted. Finally get down to the airport. And I get to the counter, and then I actually get in a total argument with people at the counter. They're like, "Oh, well, you have to pay this extra fee." I'm like, "You didn't make me pay that coming in." It's a total American response, right? What? This kind of thing. Toshio just hangs back, all good. Finally, anyway, we worked out our issue with the fee, and then we went to where I stepped through security, which of course was a much simpler thing back in '87. And so anyway, so I turned to Toshio and I said, "Hey, Toshio, man, thanks again. It's been a great semester, and we really got to stay in touch." He bursts into tears. Right then, right there in public, bursts into tears, grabs me in a big hug, lifts me off the floor because he was capable, right? Big guy. and I'm like, in my head, it's like, what the hell is going on? Right. And he's bawling, finally puts me down. That was helpful. And we said our goodbye, and he left, and I go through security, and I go sit down at the gate, and I'm like, what just happened? What had happened was that over the course of the semester, he and I had become friends in a Japanese way, a way that involved just honoring each other, being supportive, right? Valuing things that maybe, someone who's not in your circle, might not value. It's not like we spent tons of time together or anything like that, but we had become friends in a way that I had not experienced and did not recognize. I liked the guy. I just hadn't realized that we had developed that Japanese friendship. And so when understanding what it means to use another language, there's very much kind of a space of, the words you choose are only part of it, right? The position of the other is incredibly important. The opportunities you have to learn new things about yourself as a function of like using that language and being in that space, priceless, right? So I hope that in thinking about these things, that kind of intrigues you in a couple of ways. Pretty darn good to be a Rotarian in a crazy world, right? And specifically, if you ever want to visit my club, you know, you're welcome to do so. We don't leave your club, don't join our club. You're in a good club, right? But if you ever need to make up a miss, then you can come and see us. That'd be fine. We got members all over the world because we are online, asynchronous, right? If you're ever kind of curious about like ways to do education far better, I'm into that discussion. Would be happy to talk to you. If you just need like a better way of looking at the world, then nextvista.org/NVIV, right, is a way. It's a thing that I put together for teachers as like a go-to activity for their students and all. But what it is, wildly cool stories. These are videos that Shags would be like, hey, some of those same stories are in the inspirational videos on our site. Not a coincidence. All right. And feel free to give those a look when you just need to see the world a little bit better. Also trying to make the world a better place in terms of a project called Improve the World. Happy to talk about that if you're interested. And I co-teach a class at Sarah High School in San Mateo called Creative Solutions for the Global Good, which is something I love talking about as well, but that's its own presentation. So how would you find my Rotary Club? Well, that's easy. Rotary.cool, baby, right there. Right? That is one way to get to the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley. And you are always welcome. Metrotarians have a special place in our heart because your member, Heather, is like this cool friend of Rotary.cool, the club. And it is a pleasure to have a friend with whom I can talk through things like, what do you think about this speaker? Hey, have you talked to anybody in this space? I've heard about this. You have any connections? So thank you, Heather, for that cool friendship that we have, even though we've never met. Big hug, all right? Lift you off, burst into tears, all those kinds of things. And yeah, it's just good fun being able to do this stuff. So by the way, right down here is the link to get to all of the slides that I've been using, right? So if you follow that link, tinyurl.com/rh-valuing22, that'll get to all the slides that I just put in front of you. So with that, seeing as how it's 6:33, I may have like gone a little bit over. Apologies for that. I rest my case that you should value the listener. There you go. Great to get the chance to speak to you guys.
Great. We're gonna do questions, yeah.
Yes.
Amigos, we're gonna do questions and we're gonna do questions with microphones, and as your microphone sensei, if I might be so presumptuous, speak right into the top of that. So Steve will come around on this side and I'll come around on this side and give you the microphone.
This is more of a comment. I am struggling with pronouns for all my family members and others who are not necessarily either male or female.
Mm.
And well, the Japanese have it down pat already. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Here we go. All right. Do we have anybody on the Zoom side who has any questions or comments? Go ahead and raise a hand.
I have a question. Can I?
Yes,
John, you're in. Go.
So Rushton, I love the word, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you fine. You're doing great.
I love the word sensei, and I've actually used it. I had a class once a little while ago, and I really liked the teacher. And when I emailed her, I called her sensei. And I came to understand that it's not just teacher, it has large, and thank you. I mean, you pointed out that it actually, you're actually referring to, I think, status and place in society. And it has actually a more complicated and larger meaning.
Yeah.
And I sort of sensed that, but you clarified that, and thank you for that. The other word that I've used a couple of times. We get a lot of Japanese tourists up here where I am. And in traveling, there's a lot of Japanese tourists everywhere. And I've used I've actually used the term Japanese people, arigato, like somebody would hold the door for me or something.
Yeah.
So I would say arigato. And then somebody said later, no, it's domo arigato. And can you help me? I don't understand that. What am I doing wrong?
What are you doing wrong? You're paying too much attention to that one comment. Actually, arigato is a perfectly good way to say thanks. Domo arigato is a little better in that it's, well, here's one way to describe it, in that it's longer. It's like the longer it takes to say something, the nicer it's got to be, right? So domo, thanks. Arigato, thank you. Domo arigato, thank you very much, right? So like all of that kind of comes together in that as well. But I will tell you this. The better thing to say in the situation you describe is sumimasen, which is usually translated as I'm sorry or excuse me. But there is a load of overlap in Japanese between an apology and a thank you. In part because when someone does something for you and you say I'm sorry, what you are saying is that you recognize that somebody's gone to the trouble to do something for you, right? And so to apologize for having done or been anything that put that person out in some way, even if it was completely happy to, that person was completely happy to do it. It's just a part of how it is. You can get through a ridiculous number of situations of all kinds in Japanese by just knowing how to say I'm sorry, right? And by the way, like any language, if you have a couple of good words and you smile a lot, that'll get you much farther.
Well, so Rushton, I remember doing that once, arigato, and a Japanese woman laughed at me, and I thought, you know what, there's got something there I'm not doing right, and so thank you for. I'll work on that. I think it's important. I'm going to work on that.
Why she laughed. All right, and that is because you surprised her, right? The Japanese tend to believe, right? Despite everything I just told you in the presentation, the Japanese tend to believe that the Japanese language is almost impossible for everybody else to learn. Why do they believe this? Well, in part because remarkably few foreigners come over and learn it, right? I mean, that's part of it. But as I've explained, there are structural simplicities to it. If you get introduced to it early enough and in a setting that's kind of fun, you're fine. But a lot of Japanese have a lot of trouble with English. Is that because they have trouble learning English? I would say no. I would say that's because they spend years and years and years learning English in a setting where it's all translate sentences and no, you didn't get that one obscure piece of grammar right. And so you learn to be like, I'll just kind of hold back and wait for somebody else to answer, which is none of that is kind of good for learning to just use a language. Because if you want to learn to use a language, you just get out and start inflicting the word you just learned on everybody and smiling a lot. Right? So consequently, somebody in a totally different country, out of the blue, tosses a Japanese word their way. Wow, whoa, right? That's real, and it is very much a thing for Japanese to be like, what? When someone who looks like you or me tosses out any Japanese at all.
Thanks for that, Rushton. That was wonderful.
And
wonderful.
As it turns out. Cool, John.
Great. Anyone else in the room? Heather as well.
Thank you. A quick question. Because we have so many languages spoken at this table and so many language learners and language lovers, we just have a Duolingo question for you. I neglected to mention that Rushton is also a Spanish speaker and learning Mandarin. What day are you on Duolingo for Mandarin?
1313.
Thank you. Consecutive days on Duolingo.
Wow.
For those of you who don't know Duolingo, oh my goodness! All right, this is a cool little app and a great way to spend a few minutes. So Duolingo.
I have to find out. James. Welcome back, Jimmy.
Rushton says so. Eugene was traveling from Berlin, Poland, and I had several bars around like 2 bars around Monday, and I was holding one. And there was a Japanese family in the train. And the girl took the mom saying, this guy seems to be from Africa. And the mom said, what? Said, oh, he's insecure. Look, they're already holding his bags around his name and one in the hand. He seems to be insecure. I kept quiet a little bit, but I responded in English in Japanese that no, I'm not insecure. I'm just keeping my bag safe. We did not say anything at all until like another hour until I left the train. I felt a little bad that maybe I made them uncomfortable. But talking about culture, was I right to respond that way, or should I have just kept quiet?
So, because of the echo in the room, I did not catch everything you just said. I heard you speaking a little bit of Japanese. I was like, that's cool. And then I heard a very cool accent, but I think I'll need the question repeated, and actually the situation that led, because I heard you say, if I got it right, were you right to respond to a person in a certain way? Can you, Heather, can you summarize for me the particular way that we were talking about there?
I can't, I'm not totally sure I follow, sorry, James. So can you summarize?
Yeah.
I said I was traveling from Berlin to Poland in Germany.
Okay, you were traveling from one place to another.
Yes, in Germany and in Germany, and I was in a train. And the family were Japanese in the same train. So was my bags, and I had 3 bags, and 2 of them had like long handles, and I was putting them around my neck, and I was having another bag in my hand. And they started talking about me in Japanese, saying that this guy seems to be from Africa. And the mom said, why? And the girl said, he looks insecure. Look the way he's holding all his bags.
Insecure.
He looked insecure.
Okay, right. Insecure.
So I responded in Japanese that I'm not insecure, where I come from Africa, but I'm trying to get my bags on and safe. So the question I'm having for you is, talking about culture, was it okay for me, or did I do the right thing to respond in Japanese to them, or was it quite an embarrassment? Or shouldn't I have done that?
Huh. Okay, so if I understood you properly, you have the heavenly gift of a very deep voice, all right, which means that you are going to strike people as cool the moment you start speaking to them the first time. That's a big plus. In terms of Zoom and audio, it does make it a little bit challenging for me to catch it at the moment. So, so you were on a train, like somewhere in Germany, and you were talking to somebody who is Japanese. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And did the Japanese person say something to you, and you responded, "I'm not insecure," or that's the part that I'm not completely clear on, and I apologize for that.
Sure. So what happened was on the train, the little girl and her mother were talking about him, and so in Japanese. And so he responded in Japanese, which probably shocked the daylights out of him. That no, I'm not insecure. I'm just keeping my bag safe. And yes, I'm from Africa. And they were totally silent, right?
Okay.
Facial expression in my mind.
Got it. Okay, excellent. Now, so, and sir, tell me your name again.
James.
James. All right, James. I too have had the experience of being on a train, this time in Japan, and having someone say something next to me, right? And let that conversation go a bit, and then followed with and then the addition that I made to the conversation was something like, "It's amazing how many foreigners can speak Japanese," or something along those lines, right? So I would essentially say that you provided a wonderful moment of education for those two people. They will always be like, "Wait a minute, there are people out there that can speak Japanese." And I, for one, hold no critique at all for what you said. I think it's excellent.
Very good. Do we have any other questions for Rushton?
Thanks, James.
And well, it was so cool. What an amazing presentation. I'm a teacher of English language learners at the elementary level mostly. And I just found it so delightful the way that you talked about language and culture. I find it to be a fascinating subject. And I wondered if you have read or listened to John McWhorter, the linguist, who sounds a lot like you.
I am definitely part of the John McWhorter fan club. Absolutely. He has done a number of courses for the teaching company. And he's one of those people, those of you who don't know who we're talking about, he's a professor, although he's been with a number of like think tanks and institutes and things like that. And he's one of those people that it's almost as if when he's talking to you, there's actually a conversation happening between what he's telling you and what he thinks of what he's telling you at the same time, right? And I find him absolutely just wonderful to listen to. I think he's funny. I think his insights are amazing, and he will make you think about the world in different ways. One of the most important things I learned from Dr. McWhorter is that we think of languages like Arabic or Chinese or something as difficult. No. The languages that loads and loads of people speak naturally simplify because of the numbers of people using them. It's when you go to like some random little village up in the Caucasus that's like several thousand feet up, and the language is only spoken by about 200 people, and are two different like sounds. That's when the language is difficult right there, right? And so total kudos for mentioning John McWhorter. Yes, I'm a fan.
I got a follow-up comment on that. Just today, it's cultural indicator that you pointed to about if you ask and somebody says no, that's inappropriate. I was dancing on that very spot, and using the American, like I just be assertive. It's always okay to ask, and I actually taught that to a young teacher. I'm like, oh, she's like, I'm sorry, I asked you, and like, was it wrong? I'm like, no, always okay to ask. You just ask in a nice way. I'm glad you asked, because I just make these outlandish requests sometimes. Like, I asked this teacher, she's an elementary school teacher, we needed a middle school teacher. I was like, hey, just need to ask you, what about teaching middle school this year? And of course she said no, because it's the reasonable response. But just feeling so entitled to ask was just part of my American inheritance and cultural mores, I guess. It was just funny, the synchronicity, your comment and my very, laying that out there for my culture.
Wording is everything. I learned in Japan, by the way, that when you hear someone that you think's another American, you ask, "Are you Canadian?" Because the Americans will be like, "Oh no, I'm an American," and the Canadians will be like, "Hey, that's awesome," right? And so what are the different possible responses, right? As opposed to, "Oh my God, another person just assumed I'm an American," right? So anyway, all good.
One more little things.
I asked Ryan to be president of this club.
You did.
That could have put you in a position to say no.
Hey, you know what? It's always okay to ask. Just do it in a nice way.
All right, Rushton, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
I really